We are at a time this weekend of great possibilities. We are celebrating Samhain, possibly too many candies in the house, an important election, the possibility that our departed loved ones are closer to us at this moment than normal. We have turned our clocks back an hour, making us time lords in a sense, and we are marking the beginning of the 11th month of one of the hardest years in our history. It is the 11th hour of 2020, and I can tell you, I am ready for midnight. Hi, I'm Reverend Joe Cherry. I'd like to welcome you to worship today. We'll be talking about Samhain, Day of the Dead, and our old theology of universalism, our historic belief that all people have worth. We'll be featuring today some music by Mike Carney and musicians, a story by Dr. Allan Georgia, our Director of Religious Education, and we're featuring an original piece written by our worship associate, Peggy Lagodny. I hope you'll find something here that speaks to your spirit, that challenges your heart, makes you feel comfortable, and ready to face the world. So, welcome to worship.
Be The spirit of love will be intensified to godly proportions when reciprocal love exists between the entire human race and each of its individual members. That love must be based upon mutual respect for the differences in color, language, and worship, even as we appreciate and accept with gratitude the differences that tend to unite us. We do not find those differences obstacles to love.
A Samhain reflection. I've always loved this time of year, the liminal space between the riotous life of summer and the quiet, death-like stillness of winter. Now that I'm older, there's a deeper significance. So many of my family, parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, have gone beyond the veil. This time of year I feel them close. Their voices are on the autumn wind. Time to draw inward, child. Time to rest, they say. I hear their whispers in the brittle rustle of the wind-tousled leaves. I feel their touch in the breeze that plays with my hair, brushes my cheek. I walk smiling in the throes of remembering. I walk in the mornings through blizzards of leaves, yellow, gold, scarlet, rust. Some mornings the sky is a brilliant, clear blue, with clouds shading from stark white to deep purple. Rays of light play across the trees, across the houses and pavements. I chase the cloud shadows, alive. Other mornings the sky is gray, the air is misty. The fall colors are deeper then, the darkness of the trees' bark wet and glistening, deep greens of pines, and a brilliant, livid scarlet slashes across my vision, a bush in its autumn glory. I stand in awe. Autumn makes me restless. Leaves blow past my feet in eddies that pull me along, that invite. My feet want to follow in the dance.
Each week, we come together as a people. Together, we share stories, love, aspiration. We also share our bounty in ways that express our religious UU values. May this important ritual of sharing abundance remind us that making our world better is a task best shared.
So there's something on the internet that's been really kind of bugging me lately. Actually, it's been bugging me for kind of a number of years now. And it's especially weird for me, I have to say, because this thing goes along with a handful of other like small shifts in like technology and culture that are real firsts for me as like an adult, weirdly, where I've suddenly become aware that there's a generation that's younger than I am. And that is happening around this. And I know that there's a generation younger than I am because what they're doing and what they're sort of talking about, it makes absolutely no sense to me. So I can name them. And so for all of our college age and high school kids, you can see what has sort of made me realize that now I'm like a full-on grown-up person. The first thing that happened was Snapchat, the existence of this at all. This is that messaging app that lets you sort of share stories, but they sort of vanish into thin air. The next thing was mumblecore music, and especially mumblecore hip-hop. And this is coming from somebody who has loved rap and hip-hop music for a long time. The final thing, though, is from the internet. And this one's harder to put into words. But I think it can be captured by the shorthand name that's used by memes online for it. And that is me in real life, or me IRL. So me in real life is honestly a very important and actually kind of a profound thing. It's a widely shared sort of meme topic online, and it's become a way in which young people express how they are experiencing their lives and the world around them. And here's why it's grabbed my attention. The world of people and the discussion forums and the memes and videos and pictures and other kinds of things that all attach to me in real life, they're all grim, they're cynical, they express an anxiety and a sense of purposelessness that we as a community, and certainly that universalism as a heritage, needs to take very seriously. If these memes, I'm about to share a few with you, if they make you sad, that's completely okay. Because the truth of the matter is, they break my heart. I've spoken to students of mine about this. Because to be clear, we're not talking about, like a single person, or even like a few people who are sort of identifying with a certain kind of experience or suffering with a specific kind of mental illness or something like that. We're talking about a broadly felt, broadly shared, like an identifying experience of an entire generation. And central among young people is this talk about how unendurable their lives are, how hopeless their futures are, how their greatest struggles are financial and then also relate to their mental and emotional health. So much so that the very fact of reality is a burden to them. So one of my students, when I asked about this, told me that he felt like older people, that is to say, people like me, who primarily talk about their experience and their lives in terms of how it used to be good and now it's somehow bad. For them being younger, their experience is that everything has only ever been bad. They don't feel disappointed or cheated or like they've lost something. Instead, it all just seems pointless. Let me give you a few examples. So our first example, a very simple, a very straightforward reflection on a cycle. You start by doing nothing, then you feel guilty by doing nothing, then you start panicking about the future because you've done nothing. You feel powerless because of that future, so you do nothing. Next, sad animal fact. Apparently, I didn't know this, a sloth can starve to death with a full stomach. But in it is the metaphor. I'm completely full, but I still feel empty inside. Next, and this is a common feature of this kind of meme, the brain itself, which is not in this case a symbol of our intellectual powers, but rather of our emotions, is given its own voice. And so the brain reaches into its bag of emotions. Time to reach into the bag of emotions to see how we feel today. Oh, we were sad yesterday. Let's try again. Huh, the brain says. This one says sad as well. And then, of course, without narration, the realization that sad is all there is. And here's one that is especially relevant, given that we just celebrated Halloween. A man with a big smile shows up to what's clearly a costume party. The person who he meets asks where his costume is. He insists, no, he's wearing a costume. The other person says, come on, that costume is really lame. So he says, okay, I'll take it off. It turns out the costume, the thing he was wearing, was his smile. And now that's gone. How should we respond to what is clearly a deep and profound hurt being shared by scores of people throughout the world? What do we have to contribute? I would argue, actually quite a lot. The heritage of universalism is based in this extraordinary belief in the deep and indisputable goodness of people. It was always framed in terms of the belief that all people would be saved, in contrast to that traditional view among Christians that all would be judged and only some, the elect few, would be saved. That idea, the concept of being saved, has actually become quieter and quieter in the 21st century. Unless you're a Christian fundamentalist, the idea of being saved is not something most of us think of. But how does that feel here after seeing these handful of memes? And to be honest, just between you and me, I intentionally chose the least upsetting ones. The ones with the least amount of profanity and dire hurt. If you keep looking, they get more and more grim. So do any of us really think that we no longer have any need for the idea of being saved, of being helped, of being healed, of being cleansed, or of being brought back to life? All those ideas, by the way, are wrapped up in that concept of salvation that early Universalists imagined. So the fact is this: we live actually in a desperate and hurting world. And I know that that actually shouldn't be a surprise, because the fact is, so many of us, especially this year, we're overwhelmed, we're anxious, we are hurt and needy ourselves, that it's impossible to miss how beneath the pandemics and the politics and underneath the anxieties about climate change and systemic injustice and 1,000 other things, that we are all losing the thread about what makes life exceptional and precious and so deeply blessed. So here's what it is. We, that is to say you and me and all of us, those of us who dare to gather under the banner of a place like UUCC or other communities who have the audacity to place in the world, a community for all people, on the premise that all people are good and worthy and worth saving, we have the medicine. We have prophetic words to speak. We have it in us to enact the hope that we have all been starved of. And the simple reality is that there is actually still a great deal of saving to do. And we're the ones who carry the flame of promise with us that everyone is worthy of being saved, of being redeemed, of being imbued with that hope that allows us to see the best in ourselves and perhaps to contribute some part of that goodness to the world. And I know we are all feeling it. After a year of stress that comes after the end of years of anxiety, that comes after a decade of frustration and a sense of defeat, I get it. And so I'm very sorry to be the bearer of bad news. But it turns out the world needs us. The work of saving isn't done, and everyone still needs some saving. So whatever happens in this very consequential things going on in the next week for our nation, or the very consequential things going on for our church in this church year, I think we have to prepare ourselves, because there's more than one pandemic out there, and we have the medicine. So we better get to work.
It may be thought that in our church we sometimes spoke lightly of what other churches held dear. We were not irreverent in our hearts, and we never meant to sin against the Holy Spirit. The mission of the Universalist Church was to free minds from the cruel prisons of dread and fear, and to help them to understand that God and life are kinder than they supposed.
Our reading from the Global Scripture this morning is by Clinton Lee Scott. From the east comes the sun, bringing a new and unspoiled day. It has already circled the earth and looked upon distant lands and faraway peoples. It has passed over mountain ranges and the waters of the seven seas. It has shone upon laborers in the fields, into the windows of homes and shops and factories. It has beheld proud cities with gleaming towers, and also the hovels of the poor. It has been witness to both good and evil, the works of honest men and women, and the conspiracy of knaves. It has seen marching armies, bomb-blasted villages, and the destruction that wasteth at noonday. Now, unsullied from its tireless journey, it comes to us, the messenger of the morning, the harbinger of a new day.
Today, I'm going to share with you the story of our heretical people, our theological ancestors. I want to tell you the story about some people who looked orthodoxy in the face and were brave enough to disagree. The story of this branch of our theological tree begins in a little town that used to be in Germany but is now in Poland. In 1575, it was called Alt-Seidenberg. In this little town of Alt-Seidenberg was born a boy named Jakob Boehm. Jakob was too weak for the family business of animal husbandry, and so he was apprenticed to a shoemaker with a family of non-Christians. There he studied the Bible, and he read, and he joined a group of other Christians who called themselves the Conventicle of God's Real Servants. They were a study group. It was at one of their meetings that Jacob, now a young man, had a vision while staring at a beam of sunlight reflected in a pewter dish. In this vision, he felt that a truth had been revealed to him. He believed this vision revealed to him the spiritual structure of the world, as well as the relationship between God and man, and good and evil. This led eventually to Boehm writing a book called Aurora. And in this book, one of the things he wrote was that a finite human being could not so upset an eternal God as to deserve eternal punishment. Aurora was his most popular book, but not his only book. He was also an important teacher to the Religious Society of Friends. This is where a great river that would one day become Universalism began. In the year that Jacob died, 1624, a woman named Jane Ward Lead was born in Norfolk, England. She was of noble birth. Her ancestors had been granted land at the time of the Norman Conquest in England in 1096. At 20 years old, she joined a Behemist society, which studied the writings of Jacob. In 1681, at the age of 57, she assumed leadership of this group. Her writings became the core of their teachings and ideals. The group described themselves as Christian Universalists, believing strongly in the Restoration. Jane's teachings led, a century later, to others who began to break from the Baptist beliefs and Methodist orthodoxy and began to preach the doctrine of Universalism. Now, there are two major streams of Universalism in our history: universal restoration and universal salvation. While each of these theologies believes that all souls are restored to God in love, there was some difference of opinion about just how quickly that restoration happens after death. Those who believe in universal salvation believe that immediately upon death, the spirit is reconciled with the divine force of love in the universe, called by some God, saying, in essence, that you live the reward for good and evil that you create during your lifetime on this earth. The folks who believed in the universal restoration believe that everyone eventually ends up reunited with divine love, but that there is some time between when you die and that reunion based on how you behaved during your lifetime. In both cases, though, every soul is reunited with the source of all. The story of how Universalism came to be the sixth largest church in America in the 19th century is very interesting, and someday I may tell you about it. But for today, I want to talk to you about the earliest Universalists and their beliefs. It all boils down to the idea that no person is beyond love, that no human being, no matter what they've done or failed to do, is beyond redemption. 400 years ago, they denied the Christian teaching of hell, even though they were Christians. It was a very bold and sometimes dangerous move. Now, as someone who believes in universalism, I, of course, have heard, like many of us, the question, what about Hitler? It's a hard question. It's hard to answer. It's hard to think about. And I'll get to that more at the end. But our faith isn't an easy one. Many cultures around our world teach us there's a time when our beloved dead are closer to us than other times. The veil between the worlds is thinner. Samhain is one such a time. In my family and my ancestry, we have a time now to welcome the dead back into our homes. And if we live near enough to the graves of our ancestors, we go to those graves and tend to them. I know that for some listening to this sermon, this seems foolish or superstitious. For others, it might seem overly romanticized. But whether or not you believe that there is an afterlife, whether or not you believe that your ancestors can visit you, there is still a lesson here. We live with the memory of our dead, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our friends, our cousins, our siblings, our children. The memories of these people we have loved do not go away simply because they have died. We carry them with us, always. Sometimes they are more present in our thoughts than others. Their birthday comes around every year, and that may bring them to the forefront of our mind. Or a song might come onto your radio, or a movie to a streaming service, or the smell of an ethnic food might cause you to rush back into your heart. When I say to you that all beings are imperfect, this will not be news to you. But I hope that what you can see by my sharing with you the story of our theological roots of universalism, that we don't have to be perfect. These people in your life who have died, who you loved, your own beloved dead, they were not perfect people either. And yet, with the lessons of universalism, perhaps you can see your way into forgiving them for their humanness. It's a time like this weekend when our thoughts are drawn to our beloved dead by our surroundings and celebrations, the time of harvest, Halloween, All Souls Day. We can invite our beloved dead to come home with us, even if we think of that only as metaphorically, and be with them again. It could be a time to prepare their favorite food or watch a favorite movie. It could be a time to forgive hurts in the past that have been weighing on you. It can be a time to make peace with those you have loved. It can be a time for you to forgive them for leaving you too soon. It can be a time to ask their memory for forgiveness due to your own humanness. Our theological ancestors believed that all people are returned to love. Can we not still believe this? Do we not still believe this? I believe this. And for most of my life, I have been depending on the idea that I am not so flawed that I cannot be loved. May you come to know that you are not so flawed, that you are beyond being loved. Amen. I extinguish our chalice today in honor of those who came before us, who bravely proclaimed that all beings are deserving of love. This is the root of our first principle, and it is through 400 years of history that we proclaim and covenant and promote the truth that there is inherent worth in every person, and that every person deserves to be treated with dignity.